Hi, I'm Neelam Patel. I'm an artist and poet. I'm the author of Finding Her, Being Her, A Journey of Poems. And you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Yeah. My name is Abhay Dandekar, and I share conversations with talented and interesting individuals linked to the global Indian and South Asian community. It's informal and informative, adding insights to our evolving cultural expressions, where each person can proudly say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." So every once in a while on Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing, we share a spotlight and feature brief chats with an individual from the community about a special topic or cause. On this spotlight episode, I wanted to magnify self discovery through poetry, and so I was grateful to share a conversation with Neelam Patel, the author of Finding Her, Being Her, A Journey of Poems, a collection that was released just this past summer. Neelam is an artist who, through poetry, invites her readers into a world of profound introspection and self discovery through her unique voice. Her empathic tone and narrative allows one to halt and explore thoughts and emotions, speaking directly to women in various phases of life and igniting purpose and reflection for everyone. Through her poetry, Neelam's personal navigation of success and trauma evoke a spirit of solace, healing, beauty, solidarity, and empowerment. As we started chatting, I wanted to know how Neelam perhaps found this artful, transformative voice, particularly through poetry.
Well, I think poetry is one of those art forms that have very little rules. You can kind of do what you want, be yourself, and find your own voice while you're discovering it. And I think because of that, you can kind of have an abstract voice and you can really just resonate with people that have different perspectives, different point of views. And along with your own experience, you realize that there are so many others out there like you. And I think that's something that I didn't know at the beginning and that I learned as my journey started. And it just really motivated me to continue writing and then also just be that voice that maybe some people don't know how to actually make their own. They may not know who to talk to about certain things, but just to feel seen and heard is such a huge part of childhood and adulthood.
Yeah, and your poems, I mean, in that way, like, did you find or discover that because poetry doesn't really have rules in that way, and that there is a freedom of that expression, is that what was needed as far as particularly sharing, some of your thoughts and some of your reflections through a vehicle like this in this
Yeah.
kind of, journey of poems?
I definitely think so. I think you really gain a different sense of confidence when you can make your own rules. There's nobody that you're trying to appease or nobody that you're sending this to and saying, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Does this look
Right.
right? You're just kind of
Yeah.
doing whatever you want. And whether or not someone else likes it is not really why you wrote it in the first place. And for me, I didn't really think there would be a lot of people that resonated with my work just because it's my own experience. But as I realized, just because it's written in my voice does not mean that other people can't take it and have their own point of views, even. And so I learned about other people's experiences after they read my poems, and that was just something that was just so rewarding, just to be able to resonate with people that were so different than myself, even.
Right. Your poems offer a pretty profound window into your own introspections. Did you ever have to, in some ways, in coming up with this and in the process of sharing and writing this all out, did you have to overcome any feeling that sharing these may be sacrificing some of your own intimacy? Or was the prospect of sharing just simply so empowering that it sort of made up for that?
So I think the reason why I don't feel like it takes away from the intimacy is because of the aesthetics that I use. There's
Mm,
always a sense of what is she talking about? There's always a
right.
sense of deep thought that is needed in order to really understand each poem. And I think that only some people can get there. Sometimes it takes 5 times of reading a single poem to really understand it. And even then, you have your own perspective. So somebody else that's reading the poem may not ever know what I'm talking about. And to some
Right.
people that don't read poetry, I think that's what is hard for them, and maybe it doesn't give that leisure-like feel that a crime novel would. But I feel
Sure.
that, that's the beauty of poetry. You don't always have to know in a direct way what the writer is talking about. It's the mystery behind it.
Yeah.
And you get to really just figure out it in your own experience, in your own voice, and somebody else could read it and have a completely different interpretation of it.
I wonder in that way because there's a freedom in your own voice and what you're creating. But is it somewhat liberating to know that, it doesn't have to be everything for everyone?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think because of the fact that my book is so versatile, it covers things that people would be interested in of all ages and both male and female. And I think because of that, you get that I guess audience that you would never have expected. You have readers that you might have thought when you're writing this, you might have offended them. And then
Hmm.
they are actually the ones that tell you, like, I love this poem. And to me, that was one of the most surprising things is you don't really realize what people are thinking and their opinions on things until you write something like this and they actually say, like, this was something that maybe I didn't necessarily know or I've never experienced in my life, but I'm actually
Yeah.
learning from reading your poetry about women, about mothers, about relationships, things that, they have not maybe experienced yet in their life, but now they have some, tools to go about it. Things like that, I think I just never realized while I was writing.
Either growing up or in your past experiences, I'm curious if you can reflect on this one because you mentioned the word that this, some of the parts of this were surprises. But I'm curious in your thoughts now after having shared this book, what makes poetry in particular as either an art form or a vehicle for expression or a tool for people? What makes poetry so empowering?
I think it's really just, the fact that you can write such a short poem with such few words and it means so much. You don't have to go and give someone a lecture about something. You don't have to go and write this long speech where you're trying to drill something into someone's mind. It's actually just really short and it can be, to the point, or it can provide those aesthetics and just make it, an art form. And I think just having that ability in poetry is, I think, unique to all different type of writing. I think that it makes it just very easy to have anybody read it. I think when I was younger, poetry was more academia focused, and that's all that I ever knew. And I think
Right.
that there's been a movement towards poetry being more therapeutic or more even leisure-like. And I think that's another thing that makes poetry so unique is you can really make it whatever you want. You can think about the
Yeah.
poem for weeks, or you can think about it just for that moment and it just means something to you.
Do you remember the moment that you decided to write this book and perhaps what that felt like?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that's a question that I would like repurpose as when was the first moment I wrote my poem, because I never
Ah,
really,
yeah.
sought out to write this book, right?
Sure.
So the first poem I actually ever wrote was through Rupi Kaur's Healing Through Words journal. I was going through a dark time, and there was a trigger that, kind of made me feel like, okay, I need to write about this feeling. I went through an exercise and I wrote the way that I normally would. And then I started carving out pieces that maybe were not necessary to really drive my point. And before I
Yeah.
knew it, in one evening, I had my first poem. And that poem is in my book. Like, that was a poem that I actually felt was, good enough or perfect enough to be part of my book. And I think that experience I'll never forget. It was as simple as that. And once I realized, oh, that's poetry, I just never stopped, and then I had all these
Hmm.
things in my mind and it just all came out basically.
There's definitely the gratification and the power and that feeling that you're talking about of getting it out on paper and, actually like being able to visualize it. Did that require in some ways, is the sharing part of it with others equally important? Meaning that, like, certainly a process to get it out on paper. It's certainly a process to write it, but then expressing that to others and sharing that, is that equally vital, or does that not necessarily matter? Is the performance part of it actually, also equally a part of the journey?
I think it is, but it's a different part of the journey. I think they're two separate things. I think you have to first go through the process of writing out your thoughts and being confident about them, knowing that you did that work for yourself. And then after that, if you feel like it's important to share that work, then that's your decision, right? I mean, I think I have a
Yeah.
vault of poems that I haven't shared yet. And I think a lot of poets do. And so I think not every poem will be shared. And some poems are really just kept for you. And so the process of sharing them, the process of doing spoken word, those are all things that add to the experience for some people. And I think putting it into a book, reading it with the drawings, that's one experience versus listening to spoken word, that's a different experience.
Yeah.
So all of those different things, I think, are just individual in what they bring to you when you're writing. Just having somebody message me that they resonated with the poem, that is a priceless moment, but not
Yeah.
everybody may get that feeling. Maybe they want to keep
Sure.
that to themselves.
You mentioned the word journey, and I love this idea that it's in fact, a journey of poems. What elements, particularly of your Indian American or your South Asian American background and upbringing, specifically are mirrored perhaps by this journey of poems?
I think my childhood is I talked about a lot in the poetry. I do it in a very aesthetic way so that I'm not really just keying in on my individual experience, but more talking about it as a whole. And I will say my book is not just about my experiences. It's also about observations that I have seen or you know, talked to someone about. And so that's why there's poems in there that talk about grandmothers and what happens in older age. And clearly I'm not
Yeah.
there yet, but I am, empathetic to those individuals that did share those thoughts with me. And I feel
Yeah.
like it's important for those people to also be heard. And so a lot of the, culture and just patriarchy that we experience in our world, not just for South Asians, but other cultures as well, a lot of that is talked about in the book. A lot of the very discrete moments, some are more in your face and others aren't. But I think that those things, just are part of me. And that even if, things have changed in my own, inner circle or my own family that I have created with my husband and kids, those things will always be in my thoughts. I think it's important to, make sure that we, move past them or move forward so we don't repeat them. So just to say that, oh, those things aren't happening now, I find that something that, we shouldn't do, or we shouldn't, just make it seem like, oh, well, these are not black and white, so we don't need to talk about them.
Yeah, almost. I've heard others describe their expressions as both a combination of sort of like mirrors and windows, and you see the mirror of the reflection back of perhaps what's right now, but then the window into the past or
Mhm.
window into your experiences. And I'm also curious about one thing. When a reader is now reflecting back on some of your work and they share some of their gratitude with you, or that it resonates with them, how much does that accelerate your own kind of empowerment with that? And for that matter, does that provide a motivation for you to keep on expressing and keep sharing?
Yeah, definitely. I think, when I first started sharing my poetry, I wasn't sure if I would, just share two poems and then that would be it. But as I did find that I was actually resonating with people and helping them through their own journey, I felt it was important to continue doing that. And then, after some time, that's when I realized, wow, I should actually share these in a book, because it all first started just through an Instagram post. I mean, I just felt one day in some kind of, mood or feeling, and I posted a poem that I had just written that day. And it really does motivate me to continue writing, because I think there are so many things that I still have yet to heal from. So many things that I think a lot of people just stow away and never go back to. And I definitely was one of those before I started writing. And now, as I'm getting through, the process of, okay, my first book is done. Now maybe I should start writing my second one. There are even more things that I feel like I want to dig up and feel that emotion about. And I know sometimes that's scary. We don't all always
Yeah,
seek out to do that. But I feel like that's how I can actually write my best poems, is to actually get that emotion and in that moment write it. Because 2 weeks from now, I might go back and I'll be like, who wrote that? Like I don't even remember reading or writing it,
yeah,
because it was such an emotional moment that it was almost an out of body experience for some of them. And I don't
sure.
always go back and edit a lot. I think overworking your art is also something that takes away from it. So some of my poems, are just that's it. There might be some.
Almost like the rawness of it being so important and very validating.
Right, right. And again, you're not writing it for someone else, you're writing it for yourself. And so to
Yeah.
edit it means that you're now thinking, okay, well, what would someone else want this to, what would they want the punchline to be, or what would they want the perspective to be? And that's, I think, exactly what, we shouldn't do as artists, even though it's hard. It's
Right.
so difficult to not do that. But I think that not overworking it helps you stay away from that thought.
For such a personal experience and something that has such an individual, it requires individual attention, and your ability to express yourself is so important, as you mentioned. And in many ways, keeping that rawness is invigorating in that way. And yet, have you found some wonderful community building also through poetry? Has that been important to also understand that there is a real sense of community through poetry for you?
Oh, yeah. I think just the community that I have found on social media is one, but even in locally now, there's writing clubs, there's mom groups,
Yeah.
there's just so many people out there that want to talk about these types of things, or maybe, do a poetry workshop with me. There's a organization that I am going to be working with that supports journaling and poetry for middle school and high school girls, because that's
Yeah.
an age that I remember a lot of people don't know how to express something that happened and what to do in your recovery stage after. I think a lot of
Yeah.
the conversations in schools are about how to prevent bullying or how to prevent getting into a situation. But what happens after it, already has occurred. And so, helping those girls get their thoughts out on paper at a younger age, which I wish I could have, experienced those lessons back then, to equip them with that confidence to do that. And again, it's for them, whether or not they share it is their own decision. But the first step is doing it for yourself, and overcoming or getting past that obstacle that you faced at such a young age, and not letting it follow you into adulthood, without you
Right.
actually facing it head on.
Were there specific triggers for you that, in many ways, became the sparks for this expression, this creativity?
Yeah, there was one in particular, and it has to do with grief and loss and pregnancy. And I really do feel like I am so happy that I was able to experience writing to finally heal from that. It took me years to go back and say, I'm strong enough to actually face this grief. It's almost 5 years later that I was able to dig that back up and actually, think about it and feel it to its, full extent, rather than when it happened, I really wasn't there. mentally to say, okay, I'm actually going to, feel all the feels and do all of the work that it takes to get through that. And so, like most of us, we stow it away. And there was a trigger that brought that all back. And I felt for the first time in my life that I was able to actually heal from it. And like I said, there are so many things like that that I still have yet to
Yeah.
heal from, but that was the trigger. That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to go through. And it was the first thing I think that I needed to heal from to be able to carve into everything else.
One of the, I think, real treats of having guests on the show who are sharing and expressing, and particularly expressing their art and talent, is to perhaps sample some of their work. So it'd be great to hear and listen maybe to a reading of some of your poetry.
Sure. The world tricks us into thinking we have to be busy to be successful, that ambition can only be related to a career or wealth. Let's accept ambition to also mean a balancing act of all of our worlds that includes the intangible luxuries that most do not think they have control of: a warm home, a close family, time for passions, being mentally present for others, or time to be with your own thoughts. Know when to stop and just be, rather than constantly thinking about what is next. You may have already achieved it, only to continue walking past it. Letting others define your goals will only leave you chasing after a dream that was never yours.
That's Neelam Patel reading from Finding Her, Being Her. First off, for everyone, hopefully the resonance of writing and expressing and aiding in that process of healing and grieving at whatever pace is required also is something that can be empowering and hopefully very restorative for folks. Let me ask you this: when a reader perhaps finishes Finding Her, Being Her, and they may resonate with some of your own journeys, and they may even understand to some degree what you've gone through and perhaps what they themselves are going through, what questions do you hope they're now asking themselves?
I would say just, what can I do to make sure that I'm not ignoring and continuously just keeping myself from, learning how to manage my emotions or learning how to maybe face them to the point where I can move past them. What can I do that next time I get sorrow or anger? What can I do to actually walk through that moment rather than turning around and heading the other way? Because every time we do that, we're just basically waiting for ourselves to then explode one day. The more and more you keep in and kind of tug deep down, everyone gets to a tipping point. But if we can actually walk through that moment and experience all of the things that we are feeling, and like I say, make something beautiful out of it. If you can create art through that emotion, more power to you. If you're not an artist, then, do something else that serves you. Take a walk or do some yoga or whatever it is that calms you, and use those experiences to better approach it for the next time. Because we're always going to experience those emotions, and they're not something that are, to be something to be scared of. I think
Yeah.
with sorrow comes joy, right? We can't experience joy without having moments of grief or sorrow, and you can't really appreciate it either. You may take it for granted if you're always trying to feel joy. And I think I learned that, maybe the harder way, but at some point in my life, I realized, these are emotions that are important. They are emotions
Right.
that I want to teach my kids that are appropriate and that are actually needed in your day to day life in order for you to navigate and actually heal from things. It's part of your human nature to do those things, so not to be scared of it.
Well, Neelam, we're so grateful for all the questions that people are asking in reading your work, and of course for you for sharing your journey of poems with everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a real treat, and congratulations again on such terrific work.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Neelam. And please check out more at findingherbeingher.com. Thanks so much again, and wherever you might be listening, please don't forget to offer a kind rating or review for Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing, and pass it along to your friends and family. As Neelam's title suggests, don't forget to find yourself and be yourself. Till next time, I'm Abhay Darndekar.